A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Again Jesus left the district of Tyre and went by way of Sidon to the Sea of Galilee, into the district of the Decapolis. And people brought to him a deaf man who had a speech impediment, and begged him to lay his hand on him. He took him off by himself away from the crowd. He put his finger into the man's ears, and spitting, touched his tongue. Then he looked up to heaven and groaned, and said to him, Ephphatha, that is, be opened. And immediately the man's ears were opened, his speech impediment was removed, and he spoke plainly. He ordered them not to tell anyone, but the more he ordered them not to, the more they proclaimed it. They were exceedingly astonished, and they said, He has done all things well. He makes the deaf hear, and the mute speak. The Gospel of the Lord. Recently, I paid a visit to the Cincinnati Reds Hall of Fame over at Great American Ballpark, and I had the chance to tour all the different exhibits, and it's very interesting for somebody who's watched the Reds since he was little. But the most inspiring place was the room that had all of the plaques of the Hall of Fame inductees. They were grouped by the time periods that they played in. So you had the group from the 1970s, the members of the Big Red Machine, and before that, the group that played in the 1960s when I was little and watching the Reds. And you could go all the way back to the dead ball era before 1900. And it was in that area that I came across a plaque that was dedicated to the man named William Ellsworth Hoy that my grandpa once told me about. He last played for the Reds in 1902, and when he retired from baseball, he was among the career leaders in all of baseball in a number of categories. But he was remembered more than that for something else, and that something else was reflected in the name he went by when he was playing baseball. He was called Dummy Hoy. He was born in a little town in Ohio called Huckton back in 1862, and he was 3 years old, and he developed meningitis, and it just left him totally deaf. And he got it at such an early age, he really hadn't learned how to speak, so he was what would be called a deaf mute. And I guess it was the custom of the day to refer to those people as dummy. It wasn't a very inspiring term, and I guess it implied that they weren't ever expected to amount to anything. And his parents loved him, and they really wanted to do something for him. But the problem was that schools in that area just didn't take deaf students. They were thought to be unable to be educated. And when he was 10 years old, they found about a special school in Columbus called the Ohio School for the Deaf, and they sent him there, and he studied there for 7 years. And that school taught deaf children a trade, and so he learned the trade of repairing shoes. He was a cobbler, and he graduated at the age of 17, and he was the valedictorian of his class. He was pretty smart, and so after that he went back to his hometown, and he repaired shoes for a living for the next 7 years. I guess he had to earn his reputation. People were a little hesitant to take their shoes to him to begin with, but he did such a good job that they started complimenting him, and he became known as the best cobbler in town, and it gave him confidence. And it seems that back then repairing shoes was pretty much of a seasonal work. Most of the work was done in the fall, in the wintertime, when people really needed their shoes. But people in little towns and in the country in the summertime went without shoes, so it was a very slow season. And so he thought, well, I can repair shoes. What else can I do? And so he would look out the window of his shop, and he would see young men playing the game of baseball. And he thought, well, can I play this game? But not only was he deaf, he was short. He was only 5 feet 6 inches tall, and he only weighed about 145 pounds. But he was confident that he could play the game. So on his own, he practiced very hard. And he practiced more than anything else throwing a baseball. He would put out a little spot on a barn and put an X around it, and he would try to hit that spot with the baseball, trying time after time until he was really good at it. So he finally convinced the other young men of the town to let him play baseball. And he played so well that at the age of 24, he was noticed by a scout, and he ended up signing a minor league contract in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. He played for that team as a center fielder. And his manager's name was Frank Seeley. He went on to become a Hall of Fame manager. And so he guided this young prospect, this deaf mute, and he put him in center field, and Dummy Hoy was a great center fielder. He was called a fly hawk. He could run down batted balls all over the place, and he had a great throwing arm, and he was a fast runner. But the first year with Oshkosh, he only hit .219, and the problem was he had trouble when he took a pitch determining whether the umpire had called it a ball or a strike, and he took so much time trying to figure that out from the umpire. The other team would learn to quick pitch him while he was trying to figure out the call from the previous pitch. They would throw another pitch very quickly and get that past him. So again, he had a very poor batting average, and so in the off season, he and the manager, Frank Seeley, got together, and they came up with a plan where Frank Seeley, the manager, would stand outside the third baseline, and right after the pitch was thrown, he would sign to Dummy Hoy whether the pitch was a ball or a strike. And then Dummy Hoy wouldn't have to look back at the umpire. I guess the other teammates on the team picked up on this, and they began to communicate with Dummy in sign language, and it became their own private language. They would sign signals to each other all over the field, and maybe that was the beginning of the signs that players make today. But whatever, Dummy Hoy hit .367 the next year, and Oshkosh won the Northwest League pennant. And then the year after that, Dummy Hoy broke into the major leagues. He played for a team in Washington that was called the Washington Nationals, even back then. And he led the league with 82 stolen bases, and he set rookie records in a number of categories. And the next year, he actually in one game set a major league record by throwing out 3 runners trying to score. And he ended up playing in the major leagues for 14 years with different teams in Louisville and St. Louis and Chicago and again in Washington. But his favorite years, it seems, were the 5 years that he played for the Cincinnati Reds. For one thing, he met his wife in Cincinnati. But the other thing was he became a real favorite of the fans in Cincinnati. They loved to go out and watch him play. And they had a special way of cheering him because he couldn't hear any of their applause. When he made a good play, they would stand up and they would wave their arms up and down together to encourage him and to show their appreciation. So when his playing days were over, he settled in Cincinnati. He had a farm in Mount Healthy, and he raised a family of 6 children, and he adopted another. And he contributed to a number of causes for deaf people. And from time to time, he attended the Reds game. He actually got a pass that he could go to any game he wanted to without paying anything. But as it turned out, there was one more opportunity in his life to make an appearance, and it happened in 1961 when the Reds won the National League pennant, and the third game of the World Series came to Crosley Field. And the Reds invited Dummy Hoy at the age of 99 to throw out the ceremonial first pitch. So once again, this man who had overcome this problem, this handicap of deafness, and had once thrown out 3 runners at the plate in one game, threw out the first pitch. And he shared with all the fans gathered there the joy of that moment. So in our gospel today, we hear about the deaf-mute man who was brought to Christ, and you could think that the opinions about him were pretty much the same as the opinions of Dummy Hoy when he was growing up. This guy will never amount to anything. And of course we hear that Christ places his finger in the man's ears and places his finger on his tongue, and with the words Ephphatha, be opened, he restores the man. This wonderful sign. But of course, it didn't just involve Jesus and the deaf-mute. We hear about the people who brought this man to Christ and begged him to lay his hand on him. And then after his restoration, they went around proclaiming the Christ. He has done all things well. So those people became a part. They played a role in this wondrous sign. And so when I go back to the story of Dummy Hoy, I can see in his journey of overcoming his handicap the different roles that were played by different people who helped him on his way. His parents who loved him and finally found this school in Columbus that he could go to, and the teachers at the Ohio School for the Deaf who taught him his trade, and then his customers back at the shoe repair shop that gave him confidence that he could do things well. And of course, his first manager, Frank Seeley, and his teammates who learned sign language so he could communicate with him. And of course, the fans of Cincinnati, who by waving their arms showed to this player how much he was appreciated and to give him their encouragement. Thought about what the gospel can tell us today. We're all part of this community, and we all have our hardships and our handicaps, some small, some great. But we are called to play a part in guiding each other on the journey of their lives. And we do so with our prayers, of course, our prayer of intercession, and by giving of our time, our talent, and our treasure on behalf of others. And just like the fans of Cincinnati, by our encouragement, we help others along the way, and we share the joy of their accomplishment. We do so in the hope that just as Dummy Hoy at the end of his life on earth shared the joy of that great crowd at the World Series, so each of us at the end of our life of being guided by others and by guiding others will come into that vast crowd from every nation